And for those of you that don't know me, my name is Jan Lehman. I'm the owner of CTC Productivity, and with me are my rock star teammates, Arnie Howes and Nancy Krushke. Nancy is our Microsoft 365 training extraordinaire. She has the patience of a saint and works with people at all levels of technical competency and does a fabulous job. And Arnie is our business process improvement guru, and both of them are experts in 365. So I'm very, very fortunate to have them on the team. If you're new joining us, we've been doing a webinar series for coming on 2 years around Microsoft 365 and really the power of how to take full advantage of it. Nancy's going to enter a bunch of links into the chat area. If you're curious about some of the past sessions we've done, there's a link in there to go look at the past recordings on our website, and also a link to sign up for our YouTube channel or sign up for our newsletter so you're made aware of future sessions. The structure of the meetings, we do about 20 minutes content, collect questions in the Q&A or in the chat area, and then we open it up for Q&A at the end, so you know how it works. Today, the plan is to talk about SharePoint again. We did SharePoint last time, but how to leverage SharePoint to efficiently manage information. So there's a lot of rich functionality within SharePoint. So super excited. We got Arnie doing another session on that. Arnie, you can go ahead and advance. And then next month, we're going to do how to schedule meetings with people outside of your organization. So one of the things we look for as productivity consultants is time-consuming repetitive work. And how do we automate that? And so this is a perfect example of a very tedious and frustrating task of how do you schedule with people outside and how to leverage part of Microsoft 365. So this will be a good one. Go ahead, Arnie, switch. We ultimately, our goal is to help companies run more efficiently. And if Microsoft 365 happens to have a tool that would help with that, then we want to pull it in, but we don't lead with technology first. We're often looking at what the biggest challenges are for our clients. And then if we know something about the technology, then certainly we'll propose it. Next. On the next slide, these are typical issues we're seeing with companies where they're having issues with people working in a team environment. So organization of data, tasks, accountability, collaboration, death by meetings, all these sort of things are typical problems within most businesses today. And lucky for us, Microsoft 365 has some great solutions to address all those challenges. Next. In addition, coming into the pandemic, we had to deal with how the heck do we work remotely? Now we're dealing with how do we work in a hybrid world? And again, 365 is a hero and gives us lots of really great options and opportunities there. So we're lucky. Next. This is just some study. This is a study from Forrester. I think next month I'm going to replace this with our own stats on the benefits we're seeing working with clients. But in general, there's great research out there about the benefits of Microsoft 365 environment. My favorite one on this slide is the reduction of meetings by close to 20%, because that is probably the biggest challenge our clients are having, in particular in the hybrid world where everything seems to be a meeting. So lots of great opportunities to stop having meetings and start moving the conversation into the Teams environment to figure out how to communicate and collaborate more effectively. And that, go ahead, next. Please up. All right, Arnie, you're up. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jan. Well, again, like Jan said, we're going to talk about SharePoint today, but also I'm going to include a discussion. I didn't put it on here because it scares people so bad. Usually if I say metadata, people kind of flinch. They think it's a techie term, but anyway, let's talk about SharePoint and metadata. But before we do that, I always forget, not everybody knows what SharePoint is. So just a quick little bit about SharePoint. SharePoint is, I call it the beast behind much of 365. The team sites are SharePoint. A lot of functionality in SharePoint is kind of the infrastructure of a lot of 365. Most people who use it, though, most companies think of it as a place to store their documents, and it absolutely will do that. But unfortunately, a lot of businesses don't do a good job storing documents in SharePoint. And if they or you use SharePoint only for document storage, I often say it's kind of like having Michael Jordan on your team and not letting him shoot. SharePoint can do so much more, and it can do it easily. because it's got extreme out-of-the-box functionality. Microsoft talks about citizen developers. What they mean is, average employees can build a lot of stuff in 365 in SharePoint. I don't know that I'd go that far because there are strategies and pitfalls and things you should consider, but there is a lot of stuff that the average employee can do way beyond storing documents. But the bottom line is you don't have to be a developer to get a lot out of SharePoint and 365. But back in my corporate job, a lot of people used to call it ScarePoint because it was so poorly organized. That goes back to the strategy part of implementing SharePoint. But a friend in Cincinnati actually said, SharePoint, that's just a place where documents go to die. And I had to include that because that's a lot of people's experience, but that is not the fault of SharePoint. SharePoint is an absolutely brilliant platform. It's a great tool. I fell in love with it in 2003 because as a business process consultant, I found that SharePoint could solve so many business process failures and issues, and it created opportunities you could leverage. So I really grabbed SharePoint and ran with it. And it's just what it can do. I'm not overselling it, folks. It's something that should be embraced, and you should do more. Think about doing more than just documents with it. But since we're talking about documents and metadata, let's move on and talk about the documents you do store in SharePoint. SharePoint is browser-based, and whether it's in the cloud or on-prem, you still deal with URLs. URLs are just the SharePoint addresses you see at the top of your browser. And I've got a sample URL right here, and that is a link to a document that I have called Equipment Rev 2 10/30/2019. That's a long URL. And I might mention that in 365, there are a lot of places where there are character limits on URLs, and I believe it's 255 characters. This one, I think, barely gets under that, but you've got to keep that in mind because it will cause issues. But that's not all bad because, go right to this slide. I've highlighted a section, and that entire section are the folders that you hate drilling down through when you are seeking a document. So this URL is quite long because of all the folders that if you were navigating through the SharePoint document library, you would have to click down through all those folders that are separated by the forward slashes there. And I might mention, whether you're using shared drives, Google Documents, SharePoint, you've got to keep in mind that these folders in most companies, most organizations, they organically developed over time. I don't know when your organization started using computers. It was likely in the 80s or 90s if your organization's that old. But there was not a plan in most cases, and I'd almost go as far as to say all cases, unless you are a nuclear power plant or a Department of Defense. So there was a lot of thought put into them, and therefore you get silly things like here you've got a 2019 folder within a 2019 folder, which tells me there's probably also a 2020 folder inside the 2019 folder. Who knows? There was no plan. And here's one that I love doing away with. It's a folder called revisions. And we also, many people, many organizations, and it's usually not standard, they will track their revisions by putting revision numbers, version numbers, dates at the end of their file names. I hate that practice with a passion. It causes so many errors with version control. So if you don't stick around this webinar for any other reason, stick around to the end of it because there's something really slick I'll add at the end that can eliminate this practice forever.
Make them have to stay around. Good strategy.
Yeah. How's that for a teaser? So here's another one, copy of old files. And oh, by the way, the %20 in there, your browser does not like spaces in folder names or file names, it will do them, but you're adding 3 characters every time you put a space because it replaces the spaces with %20. But copy of old files, that tells me that somewhere in this SharePoint, there is a folder with exactly the same files. So we have duplication. That's another source for process errors. And I've seen some crazy folder names in my day. And here's one: Joe's files copied from his laptop when he retired. Okay, there's no doubt what's in there, but nobody's ever going to go in there. Somebody just kept them just in case we ever need them. That's not all bad, but there's better ways to do that. But I looked, I could not find stats, but somebody should do a study on how much poor folder structure costs organizations. It has to be in the billions across the United States, because the corporation that I came out of a few years ago, when I would go to a power plant, I worked for an electric utility, every power plant I went to had what we called an N drive or S drive, whatever. But you go in there and it was like playing, what was the game from the 70s? Let's Make a Deal, Monty Hall. What's behind door number 2? I mean, you had to click on those folders to see what was in them. That's a lot of wasted time. And just, I think McKinsey did a study almost 9 years ago now and found that I think it was 19% of every day an employee spends searching for or navigating to information, and folders are a big reason for that. That's a lot of man hours you can recover just by organizing your documents. So back to this URL, how long it is. I think I've beat a dead horse here in saying that.
I think you got them convinced, Arnie, that it's time to change.
Yeah, it's time to move on, Arnie. Yeah, folders within folders within folders. Those are just terrible. But look what happens when we do away with those folders. Okay, we've got a nice, slick, short URL. I'm gonna go back one more time. I'm really drilling this in because I hate this problem. Okay, we got rid of all the folders. And so now we're ready to say, well, okay, Arnie, we're getting rid of folders, but that's going to be nuts. We're going to have 10,000, 5,000, 2,000 files in a folder. That's too much to scroll through. I'm going to show you the answer, and the answer is metadata. Now, I have big feet. Jan told me I have size 13s. And I thought, well, I'm going to show how metadata works. I'm going to go to Amazon and I'm going to video shoe shopping. And if you've shopped online, I think most of you probably have, what's down the left side of Amazon is metadata. All it is I guess you could call it tags for the shoes. It's different ways to describe the shoes I was after. So I clicked on, well, obviously I want men's shoes. I clicked on size 13. I wanted athletic shoes. I clicked on Adidas and I wanted red shoes because it would match my bicycle. And so very quickly, those millions of shoes that Amazon has got winnowed down to just those that exactly met my criteria. So imagine if I had to click through folders at Amazon to find the shoes I wanted. They wouldn't sell very many shoes. So what is metadata? I've often heard it said it's data about data. It's data about files. The metadata describes each item or file in a list. So let's think about your documents. If you've got a list of 2,000 documents, each one of those documents can be described in many different ways. So let's think about this a little bit. If you store your documents in folders, you can only describe it one way. Whatever the name of that folder is what is in that document. Or I guess you could say that the document name describes it. And if you have a folder within a folder, well, there's 2 equivalents of metadata. You've described it by the top level folder, the next level folder. But that's only if you've got good folder structure. So if you use metadata in a much quicker fashion, you can filter, sort, and group the items that are in that 2,000 document list. And also, unlike folders, you can build powerful views of metadata. in SharePoint. This is just a very simple document library that I built. And you can see you've got little colors. People love graphics and colors. But the main thing to notice is, and here's a little cleaner view of just an ordinary document library. Across the top, you can see year, department, owner, and document type. Those are all metadata columns that I added, custom metadata columns. To the right, you can see modified by, modified. SharePoint keeps certain metadata anyway, no matter what you do, such as created, created by, those types of things. But it gives you the ability to add customized document headers or column headers. And here's a slick thing you can do with metadata that you cannot do with folders. One more thing. In this case, in SharePoint, you can view it in what I call spreadsheet format. SharePoint calls it grid view. Doesn't matter. It operates a lot like a spreadsheet. But let's say you have an org chart change, a process naming change. I saw this a lot in the electric utility industry. We would seem like about every 2 years change the production department to be called the operations department, and back and forth. And then every time there was a merger, the new company called it whatever we didn't call it. So we were constantly having to mass edit data of different kinds and files. We could do it quickly using SharePoint and metadata. So just like an Excel spreadsheet, you could click on the column heading and you see it drops down. I can sort reverse if I want. I can filter by values in that column. I could group by departments and quite a bit more. But if I were to click on that filter by option, it opens the panel on the right side and it scans down through that list of documents and says, okay, what are the choices here? Just like Amazon's Adidas, Nike choices on shoe brand, and I can narrow it down to what I want. Here's another view. Like I said, you can build lots of views that meet your employees' needs. This view is called by department. You see it upper right there. That's, by the way, that's called the view drop down. I'll show that a little bit more in a minute. But over on the left, you don't see any documents because I have it, the view built to collapse up under the names of the departments. So if I were to click on that arrow right beside human resources, it will expand the list of documents. And
Hey, it looks like you have a fan. Angie's agreeing with your stat. She said she heard of someone last week that spent about 45, 60 minutes looking for something in a folder structure. So definitely not uncommon.
There you go. Oh, and by the way, I don't think I know I didn't include it as a slide, but across all of SharePoint and even Teams, and that search engine in Teams is another beast. But since we're in SharePoint, all SharePoint pages have a search bar at the top, and you can search. It will search metadata before it searches anything else, before it searches file names, and also SharePoint will search the text of documents. But the order of search priority is it will search metadata first. So number one, get your documents in order and tagged correctly with metadata. But then teach your coworkers, your employees to use the search bar. And that's even faster than navigating to all these views, especially in Teams. I better get back on my script here. We're going to go over. So even though I am in this specialized view that I built, I still retain the option to filter by years or to group by years and that sort of thing. Now, I talked about the view drop down. Let's go over to the right side there. And in this document library, and I just built this quickly for this presentation, you'll see that I built by department, by owner, by type, most recently modified. You kind of get in your end users' heads and think, what is their process? What do they need to see to do their job more efficiently, and build them views. And oh, by the way, if you look If you look down at the bottom of that circle, you see create new view. Only administrators can create public views for all employees who have access to the files. But even as an individual user, if you're not an administrator, you can create a new view that you like. Maybe your job is unique and nobody else does the same job, and you want to see those documents in a different manner. Knock yourself out. Go click on that, build your own personal view, and it will always be available to you. So gone are the days where every time you have to go into like a spreadsheet or a folder, you've got to create your own views. And now you build it one time and it's always there. So how do you add metadata? There's multiple ways, but the way I usually do it is I click on the little cog there and it will open up the library settings page. That's if you're an administrator. Regular users cannot add metadata. But also, if you look at that view drop down that's still on the screen, you can see where you can create new views. You can't add metadata, but forget I said that. I should have stayed on setting new columns. But when you click on that cog and you go to site settings, you'll see the create column option there. Again, only administrators. And you know, if you've got a very small organization, or there's only 3 or 4 people using the document library, knock yourself out, go build metadata columns, play with it, learn how it works. But a word of warning, if you've got very, very important documents or a larger organization, there are some strategies that keep you from building a mess, because just like shared drives, these things can get out of control. Metadata, you know, you don't want too many, you don't want too few. There's some good practices to follow, as well as there are some pitfalls. Just use discretion. If you have questions, please call us. We'll try to answer your questions, help you out if you need us to. But this is such a valuable tool, metadata, that you'd be well served to go experiment with it. Create a practice library if you must. So bonus time, I beat metadata to death. Here's a couple bonus tips around document libraries. You've got the little ellipsis there next to the file name. And you remember I said I can't stand the practice of tagging dates or version numbers after a document, and then 6 months later you go look at it and there's 78 draft documents and you're wondering which one is the final. You can stop doing that forever if your end users all know that version history is there and it's keeping old versions behind the scenes. So you can name the file exactly what it is. Don't add a version number. Don't put final, really, I mean final this time .doc. You don't have to do that anymore, because behind the scenes, if you click on version history, you'll see the option to view, restore, or delete. And you can see it's got 1.0, 2.0, version 3.0. You can get advanced and have version 3.1, 3.2. That's for another webinar, but that's when you're saving drafts, but not letting the drafts be seen by the general audience.
I mean, you told me the other day there's a difference between on-prem SharePoint versus in the cloud, right? Was it with version history that you have to go turn it on somewhere? Is that the distinction?
Yes, good point. Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, because if you're using on-prem, meaning it's not in the cloud, hopefully you're in the cloud with SharePoint Online, but if you're not, don't assume it's keeping versions behind the scenes, because it used to be the administrator had to turn on version history. You know, they were concerned about using up too much storage space and all. So if you're using the on-prem versions of SharePoint, be sure and ask the administrator to see if version history is turned on. And if not, please turn it on, because wonderful tool. Thanks, Jan. That was a big catch. So I've got the share slide up. Here's another thing. If you currently send attachments, best practice is not to send attachments. I'd love to end that practice as well. You should, if you're using
And she
email.
agrees with you, Arnie.
Yeah.
I think she gave you a hallelujah.
There you go. Yeah. Well, for example, if you send a document to someone who's on a Mediterranean cruise and they come back 2 weeks later, they open that email and they click on the attachment. You know, that thing's 2 weeks out of date. You may have changed it 50 times since then. Now you've got an inefficiency, chance for major errors, etc. So that alone is reason enough to send a link rather than an attachment. But in SharePoint, there's multiple ways to send a link. But in this case, you can click the ellipsis again and click on share, and it will bring up this window, much like if you shared something from OneDrive. But you tell the document who you want to send it to. You're sending a link to that document. And here's the couple cool things. It's always up to date. When they click that link, they will see the most recent one. If they have editing rights, you can co-author, which if you have not done co-authoring when you're working on a document under a tight deadline, it is a wonderful tool. That's where, you know, two people can work on the same document at the same time and not step on each other's toes.
It's a little creepy though, when you're in there and you realize somebody else is in there. Just got to say.
Yeah. And if you happen to step on each other's toes, which doesn't happen very often, it will warn you and say, hey, you have conflicting changes, and it will show you the two and hey, choose one.
So Arnie, in regards to sharing, if the person already has access to the document library, you don't necessarily want to or need to share, right? You just want to copy the link and send them an email.
Right. Yeah. Bottom line is don't send an attachment, but yes, Nancy. And also, if you are sharing with an external party and suddenly you're no longer doing business with them, you can revoke access. You can't do that if you sent an attachment. Once you send an attachment, it's out there. So that's handy. And if you're still using email instead of Teams, I'll get on my soapbox again, please use Teams. But if you're using email internally or externally, you can paste the link right in here too. But if you paste the link, then you've got to tell the document, hey, this person has access. So there is an extra step there. So here's another trick. In lists or libraries in SharePoint, you can click on the Alert Me, and it will send you either text messages or emails. Most people use emails. You can get an alert when anything changes, when someone else changes a document. And here's the part I really like. Notifications can become a nuisance. So let's say you have an active list or an active library and you don't want to be bombarded. You can choose to have a daily summary or a weekly summary. For example, let's say it's an action item or task list, whether you're using a list or a document in a library to track that. But regardless, it changes a lot over a week for a work group, perhaps. You can tell it, send me a notification on Thursday mornings at 9 o'clock because our meeting is at noon. So then I can review it and see where everything stands. Slick feature.
It's so fun to send an email saying, hey, I updated it.
That makes you feel like you did something and you really were drinking coffee the whole time. So I drink coffee while I work. Okay, now here's another one for you people who battle templates constantly being typed into and then saved rather than save as, and now your template has data in it. That's never good. So if you look here, upper left side, you can see in the drop down it says add template, edit new menu. You can only do that if you're administrator, but you can add a template that is stored elsewhere where they only have read rights and they cannot overwrite or can't type into the document. They have to save as. And you can see here, I added a new policy and a new procedure. Template. There. Finally got it to circle. So in summary, metadata is awesome because you have no more folders. And FYI, anytime I've ever rolled this out with a work group, a 15-minute demo is good enough and people would catch on. And I don't recall ever having employees of a work group say, I hate metadata. I want to go back to folders. I've never heard that. There's probably always going to be a first time, but I haven't seen it. You can manage thousands of files as easily as a spreadsheet, has a short URL for pasting into emails and such. You can build what I call canned views one time and save them forever. And filtering, sorting, grouping. That's the biggie.
Awesome.
So that's all I have, and we'll have some questions here in just a few.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up, and we can open it up for questions for Arnie. I think you only have one question so far in the chat, unless I missed one. So go ahead and advance, Arnie. Thank you. So a lot of times people attending the webinars think this is all we do, and we do a lot more than this. So we definitely, again, our goal is to come in and help a company run efficiently. And so we do a lot of process improvement work, looking at how you streamline workflow. We often say that we do Lean Six Sigma for office workers, not the manufacturing floor, but office workers. And if Microsoft 365 has a tool that's going to help do that, then we pull it in. Next slide, Arnie. We also do a lot of coaching, training, presentations on anything related to productivity, anything with helping leaders be more effective to drive efficiency through companies. We definitely do that. And again, a reminder, Nancy will enter into chat again all our different links. The webinar next month is going to be on how to schedule meetings with people outside of your organization. Hopefully you all know how to use Outlook to be able to see calendars inside your organization to easily schedule. But that's the session for next time. And at this point, we'll open it up for Q&A. So there was one earlier. So what was the one? So Maria's asking, would you be able to share the slides? Maria, we record the session, and you're welcome to go out and look at the recording after. And it's also out on YouTube, if that's helpful. And then Maria had a question earlier. Yes, did you catch that one? I think it was,
Yeah,
how do you
tag something when you upload a document?
Yeah, that's good. I should have included a slide for that. So here's what you do. When you build the column for metadata, you simply require that there be a value in it, in that field. So if an employee uploads a document and that field is not populated, it will prompt them to choose from the drop down or to populate that metadata field. And there is this is more advanced, but there is a way you can in your templates put quick parts in the Word documents, for example, and when they fill in those fields in the template in the document, it will automatically populate the metadata, so they don't then have to populate that when they upload it.
Awesome. So any other questions, you're welcome to unmute yourself. Nancy, it looks like the hyperlinks didn't work, just the first one, just so you know. So past recordings and the others, the hyperlinks aren't there. Weird. Yeah, any other questions in chat or unmute? And it doesn't need to be about SharePoint. It can be anything about Microsoft 365 if there's no SharePoint questions.
Wow, Angie said.
No. I grabbed them from the all hyperlinks, so.
Okay, no worries.
I just saw Angie's post, 45 to 60 minutes looking for something in a folder structure. And that's just the person you heard about. I mean, people just quietly suffer.
Well, and the first question I had, but I couldn't bring it up in the moment, was, did you know that there's a search function? Like, I wanted to coach through that in a way that, like, we're focusing on the problem and not making them feel bad in front of the group. Like, there is also the problem that the folder structure is bad. So let's focus on that first. But yeah, we just recently went through a change from our intranet service that was a third-party intranet to moving everything to SharePoint, and it has been fantastic. So it's great to hear your coaching on this, because we just went through all this and it helped me to understand it just a little bit more too. So thanks.
Yeah, and if you implement metadata, I have coached a lot of groups who implemented the metadata, and often the leaders were concerned, you know, this is pretty radical change. They've used folders since the 1990s, but a 15-minute demo usually puts people's minds at ease.
Yeah, and you're right that as soon as you say metadata, it gives you a little bit of power, but also is a little bit scary. Because if I can say, well, I'm talking about the metadata here and all the bones behind everything else that you're doing on Office 365, then they can understand it a little bit better, how it
Right.
affects them.
Right.
But we
And-
tricked it with the view that it still looks like folders, even though it's not folders.
Exactly. Yeah, it works the same way, but without folders.
Mhm.
And another discussion too, if you are not the leader of a work group or an organization, governance is important. And governance scares people just like the word metadata, but leaders, owners of the processes really should put some expectations out there. And you know, it's helping people. So you got to have the whole group working in the same manner. And so some sort of expectations, you know, even if it's thou shall use metadata, require them, whatever, but you know, it's in the leader and the business's best interest when people are spending 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 45 to 60 minutes looking for files. That comes out of the bottom line. Not to mention it frustrates those employees terribly.
Angie, it's great you guys are doing an intranet. I think about half our clients are having us redo their intranet on SharePoint. So it's a great communication hub. And what I'm learning from Arnie and Rafe is it's not that hard to do, right? And to design, and then the ongoing maintenance of it is so much easier than past intranets. So that's awesome.
Yeah, it's been a positive experience. And I just had somebody called me a little while ago and said, hey, I have a picture I want to share, because we've incorporated Yammer into ours as well for just the social aspect and keeping everyone connected across all of our offices. I got this picture I want to share to talk about our job site. Should I send that to marketing? I said, no, you should post it. So I walked them through and it was fantastic. I said, you know, we want to see that you're supporting it because your name is right there.
Yep.
Show people that even you can do it, and then also give you a chance to give kudos to your team. So it's been really neat to see that.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I often say, you know, it's getting to be so user friendly. People download new apps to their phones all the time. They don't have training classes on those. They just start using them. And
you know how to use Amazon. That's a great example. I'm going to use that one.
And 365 is very user friendly. So to implement 365 or Teams or SharePoint, the subparts of 365, it's really not an education issue or an end user issue. It's a leadership issue. The leaders want to understand what it can do, implement those apps for a purpose, and then place those expectations out there, because most of those apps are group applications. They're not individual applications like Word or Excel. So there's got to be some guidance on here's how we as a work group use this stuff. And we got a couple questions here. I need to be quiet and answer them. Well,
I'm gonna lead if I could on one of them, because I want to tell a story about one of our past clients you worked on. So Sarah, great questions. One of her questions is, do you have file security? What's file security look like on SharePoint? And one of the things I learned from Arnie and Nancy is Planner is a great tool for tracking tasks and status views and things like that, but people can delete stuff, and that's kind of the danger. So we had a client that Planner would have worked, but they really had concerns about things all of a sudden disappearing. And so Arnie built a SharePoint site really to drive accountability, and there's a lot of controls around who can do what. So Arnie, what you want to answer that second one first on what you can do from a security standpoint?
okay, yeah, it's highly customizable. And the client that Jan talks about, we just simply made a permission level that was contribute with no delete permissions. So they could update their action items or their tasks, but they could not delete, whether accidentally or on purpose. But SharePoint security is a fairly simple matter, but even though it's simple, there are pitfalls. So you've got to have a little bit of a strategy, but the bottom line is SharePoint permissions or security is way more robust than the shared drives that perhaps you're used to using. So very powerful security customization potential. You just got to make sure the person who is setting the permissions really does understand the ramifications of what they're doing. Because
there's another level of that too when you get into actually adding retention tags, and is it confidential, it's a public file, or it's a private file. When you start adding those tags in the back end, then if it is a file that can never leave the company, nobody in the company can download it outside or share it with anybody outside. So when you start using some of those tags and your IT department, or you work with somebody that really understands all that information, the security of your files is even more tight.
Good questions. And there's one more here we haven't answered yet from Sarah. If you implement metadata, would it be pure metadata? Whoop, it scrolled down. Would it be pure metadata, or would there still be some high-level folders? You can do a mix of both. You could separate what would be high-level folders. It may now be in different SharePoint sites. It could be in separate document libraries, or within the same document library, you could have high-level folders as well as including metadata. You can have kind of a hybrid situation. I rarely see folders and metadata used in the same document library, but there are some cases where that is the best strategical choice. So I guess the answer is yes, you could have high-level folders. But the metadata, you cannot set different metadata in each folder. It would be the same metadata across all folders, unless you get into content types, and content types are very powerful, but that's a whole nother webinar.
Awesome. Any other questions? These were great. We like to stump the presenter, so don't hold back.
Thanks, Jan. Somebody's going to stump me for sure. As you can tell, I'm a pretty big fan of Teams and SharePoint, and I love hearing stories like was it Stephanie? Somebody shared there a few minutes ago.
Yeah,
that makes me feel good.
We have good job security, Arnie. We save people time.
There's no doubt it's the future of work.
Yeah, for sure. Well, if there's no more questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up. And if you didn't check out the webinar last month, you might want to check it out. It was on how to manage a company using EOS built on the SharePoint environment. So that might be of interest for some of you that weren't there last time. And another message. I thought I saw another message come in. Okay.
I just posted all the links again.
Okay. It still didn't work, Nance. I don't know why. We'll have to figure that one out. But okay. Thanks, everyone. Good to see you. Thanks for being here. Arnie, you rock as usual. Nance, thanks for all your help. And we'll see you guys next month. Take care.